Last year, the U.S. federal government collected exactly $5.3 trillion in taxes from its citizens. Let that number sink in. $5.3 trillion. That's roughly equivalent to the entire annual output of the world's fifth largest economy. Divide it among every American, babies, retirees, the unemployed, and you get about $15,400 per person. So the real question is, where does all that money actually go? Can we even track where it's spent? Here's the shocking truth. The U.S. Department of Defense, the Pentagon, has never once passed an independent financial audit in its entire history. As of 2025, it has failed 8 consecutive times. The government doesn't know where your money went, or maybe it just doesn't want to. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how the tax system works. You'll learn what direct taxes are, what indirect taxes are, and why that distinction matters for your daily life. You'll see how the government collects this money and what it claims to spend it on. And most importantly, you'll be equipped to decide for yourself whether any of this is fair. Let's get into it. Think about this. When you see the taxes deducted from your paycheck every month, how does that make you feel? Most people say the same thing. That money's just gone. What do I actually get for it? That's a completely legitimate question, because taxes are a deduction the government takes without asking. When you buy something at a store, you see the price, but in the tax system, someone else is deciding what gets purchased on your behalf, and you don't know what it is. In 2025, the U.S. federal government brought in $5.2 trillion in revenue, but spent over $7 trillion. The gap, roughly $1.775 trillion in deficit. The government spent $1.8 trillion more than it collected. To cover that gap, they borrow. And who pays back that debt? You do, your children do, your grandchildren do. But here's what's even more unsettling. This isn't unique to the U.S. Tax systems around the world raise the same question. Where is the fairness? A tax is a mandatory payment collected by the government from individuals and businesses to finance public services. I emphasized mandatory. Taxes aren't optional. Don't pay, and there are legal consequences. So why does the government take this money? Because certain services, roads, bridges, national defense, healthcare, education, can't be provided equally for everyone through the market alone. Economists call these public goods. Take national defense. If one neighborhood is protected from attack, so is the one next to it. Everyone benefits whether they paid or not. That's the gap the government fills. But to do it, it needs money. So how does it collect that money? Here's where the system splits in two, and this split directly affects your life. Category 1, direct taxation. These are applied directly to a person or a business. You earned money, the government takes a cut directly from you, no middleman. The biggest example, income tax. In the U.S. in 2025, individual income taxes made up 50.5% of total federal revenue, roughly $2.6 trillion. Then there's corporate income tax. Companies pay tax on the profit they generate. And estate tax. When someone dies and leaves behind wealth above a certain threshold, it gets taxed. The core logic of direct taxation is simple. The more you earn, the more you pay. Economists call this progressive taxation. The rich pay more, at least in theory. In theory, yes. In practice, things get a lot more complicated. But we'll get to that. Now let's move to the second category, and this one operates far more quietly. You're paying it without even realizing it. You wake up in the morning and grab breakfast. There's a tax built into that price. You fill up your gas tank. Tax. You buy cigarettes, you buy alcohol. Extra tax. You shop online. Depending on your state, sales tax. All of these are indirect taxes. You're not paying the government directly, you're paying the seller, and the seller passes it on to the government. In the U.S., consumption taxes are relatively low, just 16.8% of total tax revenue. The OECD average is 31.1%. Americans pay comparatively little in indirect taxes, but what they do pay disappears into everyday purchases without being noticed. The most important thing about indirect taxes, they don't care about your income. Whether you earn $30,000 a year or $3 million, you pay the same sales tax on a loaf of bread. This is controversial because if someone earning $30,000 a year pays the same tax as someone earning $100,000, is that really equal? Economists call this a regressive tax. Lower income earners carry a proportionately heavier burden. People who don't know this assume taxes are the same for everyone, but the system runs much deeper than that. Now let's look at where the U.S. actually spends the money it collects. In 2025, the U.S. federal government spent $7 trillion. The bulk of that went to four major areas: Social Security and retirement, healthcare programs, defense, and interest on debt. Social Security and Medicare, elderly healthcare, together account for roughly 45% of total spending. Defense, $1.312 trillion was allocated, about 19% of total spending. Interest on debt, this number grows every year. The annual interest payment on the national debt has now surpassed $1 trillion. Think about that. A significant portion of the taxes you pay goes to covering the interest on old debt. It's a vicious cycle. You borrow, you pay interest, you borrow more. Social Security payroll contributions, the 6.2% deducted from your paycheck, go into a separate fund. That money finances retirement benefits. So we're collecting money, spending money, but are we actually accounting for how it's spent? The answer to that question is going to stop you cold. In any democracy, public institutions are required to undergo independent audits. It's the only way to verify that taxpayer money is spent correctly. The vast majority of U.S. federal agencies go through this process and pass, but there's one that never has. The Pentagon, the U.S. Department of Defense, has never passed an independent financial audit, not once. It has failed 8 consecutive times since 2018. In 2025, the Department of Defense was allocated $1.312 trillion, and auditors found that the department couldn't even properly verify its own $1 trillion balance in the U.S. Treasury. The F-35 fighter jet project, projected to cost $2 trillion over its lifetime, had assets auditors couldn't fully track. A failed audit doesn't mean money was stolen, but it does mean there's no answer to the question, where did the money go? And that distinction matters enormously. In 2015, the Pentagon buried a report identifying $125 billion in administrative waste. Why? Because they were afraid the findings would be used to cut their budget. Pause on that for a moment. You're collecting trillions of dollars, you can't account for where it went, and when someone figures it out, you hide the report? How does a system like this stay legitimate? The answer is buried in the actual philosophy of taxation. There are 3 core justifications governments use to collect taxes. First, public services, funding things everyone needs: roads, defense, courts, fire departments. Second, redistribution, preventing extreme concentrations of wealth. The wealthy pay more, that money funds social programs. Third, regulation. Governments use taxes to discourage behavior they don't want. Tax cigarettes, alcohol, and carbon emissions heavily. People consume less. All 3 justifications make sense in theory, but the real question in practice is, are these goals actually being achieved? Economists disagree on this constantly. One camp says progressive taxation kills growth. The other says flat taxes increase inequality. This debate never ends.
This is where I give you the most critical insight in this entire video. The tax system doesn't feel fair to people because there's a massive gap between perception and reality. A corporate executive benefits from dozens of legal tax advantages. Business expenses are deducted, offshore structures are used, depreciation is calculated. A salaried worker has none of that. The money is withheld from their paycheck before they ever see it, no negotiation. This is why the tax system creates the impression that it taxes not who earns the most, but who's the easiest target. In the US, the top 1% of earners pay roughly 40% of all individual income tax revenue. But when compared to the total wealth they hold, that share is still hotly debated. On the other hand, this is also true. US consumption taxes are among the lowest in the OECD. That's a relative relief for the middle class. But if a $1.8 trillion deficit is growing every year, that relief has a price, and it will be paid, either through inflation, through rising interest burdens, or through the debt we leave to the next generation. And this is where the question sharpens. Is the tax system protecting us or managing us? The answer to that question depends on your political philosophy. Progressives say government should grow, provide more services. Conservatives say taxes should shrink, protect freedom. But there's one thing both sides agree. Not knowing where the money goes is unacceptable. A department that has failed its audit 8 consecutive years is operating with a $1.3 trillion budget. This isn't just an accounting problem, it's a trust problem. Let's bring together what we've learned today. First, taxes come in 2 forms, direct and indirect. Direct taxes come straight out of your income. Indirect taxes are embedded in your purchases. Second, the U.S. federal government collected $5.3 trillion in 2025, but spent $7 trillion. That gap is covered by debt. Third, being able to collect money doesn't mean it's being spent correctly, and the fact that the largest budget in the government has gone unverified for 8 years proves that point. Taxes are an indispensable tool of the modern state, but that tool only means something when it's wielded with transparency and accountability. As a citizen, you should be asking what you're paying, where it's going, and whether any of it is right or wrong, because it's your money. If you watched this video and thought, I should have already known this, let me tell you, most people don't. On this channel, we make financial literacy clear and accessible for everyone. The next video goes even deeper. To make sure you don't miss it, subscribe and hit the bell icon. That way, the moment a new video drops, it comes straight to you. See you next time.